a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, you will have noticed that our society's relationship with marriage is undoubtedly changing. Today we welcome Greg Bondar from Every Home for Christ and Christian Voice Australia to walk us through recent news coming to us as we approach next week, which is Marriage Week. He'll be speaking with us also about a study that shows the condition of religion around the world. Welcome back to 2020, Greg Bondar.
Delighted to be with you, my friend, and I have to tell you, I think Neil's lost his job, mate.
Oh, come on, don't be like that. We all love Neil. We love Neil to the moon and back, mate. And I was saying to you before off air, it takes two of us in the studio to do what Neil can do all by himself. So we pray for Neil that he's having a great holiday, and we trust he's going to return back stronger and fitter and more awesome than ever. And it's great to have you with us today, mate.
Thank you very much, my friend. And I wish Neil all the best as well. Now, look, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is we've got Marriage Week coming up 14th to 20th of September. Now, you would agree that marriage is primarily, the keystone for a flourishing society. And unfortunately, if we look at marriage from a biblical perspective, there's so much evidence, mate, to show that marriage is important. And in particular, I refer to Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And that's basically the crux of it, male and female. And by God's divine sort of action, marriage is something that instituted by God. We're a new entity once we're married. We're one flesh, and I really am sad that marriage is starting to decline in many ways. So it's great that we've got this Marriage Week coming up next week.
Yeah, when God creates, he creates the ideal. He creates out of an expression from his own person, from his holiness and from his purity. And so we see that something of this definition there of male and female and their unity inside of marriage is an expression of the goodness of God in itself, isn't it? And if we want to live outside of that, well, we choose then to live outside of all of the best of God, which is a shame. Yeah. It's a shame that we call upon ourselves. And not that anyone who's not living in marriage is, should be condemned, but the reality is there's so much good that God has packed into his ways, isn't there?
Absolutely, and I've been going through some biblical verses because I have to tell you, it's my wife and I, you ready, mate? It's our 48th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Just last week, so I must be doing something right. I reckon she's still with me, so she's very.
I'm sure you're both doing a great job at it, mate. I'm sure.
Thank you, my friend. But look, in particular, if you have a look at Mark 10 verses 6 to 9, it's a sacred union, one that we should be all recognising. And of course, Corinthians 13 outlines the whole aspect of marriage. And then Ephesians 5:25, love your wife as God loved the church. Now, one of the things we've got to make sure is that you and I both know that there's been an erosion, a devaluation of marriage in the secular world. And one of the things we've got to do is try and bring marriage back to where it belongs, which is the foundation of society, foundation for the family. Because if we look at figures from the Australian Bureau of Stats, the total number of marriages between 24 for 2024 was pretty much down. But in particular, the number of marriages conducted by a minister of religion is down as well. So that says a lot, my friend, that marriages are not what they used to be, and I'm hoping that Marriage Week will now celebrate and bring back marriages to the forefront.
And marriage is not just an institution that people intellectually agree to. How would you describe the impact on the next generation that a married couple has?
Yeah, that's a great question because you see, marriage is a relationship. It's a relationship between you and your wife, but also a relationship with God. Because as our love for husband and wife grows, I think our love for our Lord Jesus Christ grows as well. And I think between the two of us, we seek a deeper relationship with our Lord. And I know, but my wife and I often sit down and talk about how was your day today, what what came into your mind from a biblical perspective. We share devotionals together, and it gives us a greater understanding. My wife happens to be a chaplain at a Christian school. The ministry work I'm doing here at Every Home for Christ and Christian Voice Australia. But marriage bonds us, brings us together. And I'm really hoping for the young ones, don't think light of it. Make sure that, when you do marry, it's in the biblical perspective of what it's meant to be, and that is the foundation for society, foundation for a family.
And that next generation that are coming through, living inside of that stability that you've just described there, Greg, of your marriage being 40 years old at the moment and maybe 40 years rich, we could say, it gives a security and a foundational emotional bed for the kids to grow up in and become healthy adults. And there's so many knock-on effects that do happen in the lives of children from houses that have had chaos in the houses and where essentially that commitment of I do wasn't followed through with. How do you see society in trying to, as you say, bring it back to marriage, reinvigorate the thoughts and the foundations of marriage? How do you see we could go into this society that we have right now and bring forward an awareness of those things?
Yeah, look, that's a great point you make there because, you see, we need to bring it to the forefront. We, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, that the society tends to erode and devalue the meaning of marriage. And that's really, really sad because this happens throughout the world, not just Australia, but in particular, Australia is seeing a huge decline in the actual number of marriages by a minister of religion. And that's really sad. And not only that, but, one of the things that the young ones ought to be aware of is that marriage is for keeps. I remember when I was presiding over my son's wedding, I told them, I said, look, marriage is for keeps. Make sure that in your marriage you take a number of elements of a healthy marriage, and they can be from a commitment to each other, to absolute faithfulness, trustworthiness, praying together, delight in each other. And one of the things I have to learn more often is to make sure that, that I forgive my wife as much as she forgives me. So there's so much in it, my friend, that, let's not devalue the significance of marriage from a biblical and Christian perspective.
And so often when marriages do break down, there's one party that is dissatisfied, they're not happy with one thing or a series of issues there, and we don't want to neglect the issue of abuse because that does come into it, and that's unbiblical and goes, even the law of Moses has got conditions around a healthy marriage, and Jesus reinforced that in the New Testament. But nonetheless, societally, there is a lot of conversation about the individual inside of marriage. I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied, we've grown apart. Marriage, would you speak to the idea of a marriage not just being an end for the happiness of two people, but being an institution that when we cling to as members of society, the entire society is strengthened?
Yeah, look, I'm interested you mentioned the word institution. You see, I see marriage as a relationship. I've made a commitment to my wife from a biblical perspective. She's made a commitment to me. But a lot of marriages struggle. They really do. And in particular, I'm very concerned when Christian marriages struggle. And I know some of the counselling I've given to men in terms of abuse, because I'm a chaplain as well, and I do a lot of chaplaincy work. I keep saying to them that, we're not perfect. Marriages will struggle. And one of the things we've got to do is show that we are strong as men. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, love your husbands. And I think it's a struggle. And we as Christians ought to be demonstrating to the rest of society, hey, We're not perfect. We're struggling, but we're committed. We're bonded under a biblical worldview. And I think that's the kind of thing we've got to try and show the world, show the young ones. And I think the church ought to be making more of the fact that marriage is the key to a flourishing biblical society.
Yeah, absolutely. And those struggles that we all do face, every marriage faces them, every individual in a marriage faces their own personal journey, and sometimes it's hard to be understood. But the other side of the equation is when we make those vows before God himself, we realize that our reward is not in this earth. Our reward is eternal. Our reward is out of this earth. And sometimes God even sends marriage partners to people to draw out the best in the individual. And again, we don't want to be permissive around areas of abuse, either financial or physical, emotional. No. Any of that sort of stuff needs to be entirely ironed out. But at the end of the day, there are so many issues where God is actually using iron to sharpen iron. Yeah. And one of the pieces of iron says, I don't like that abrasion. What would your advice be to families that are, or even right now, marriages that are listening, and the abrasive iron that's sharpening them up is very uncomfortable? What advice would you give as a chaplain as well, Greg?
Look, there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but in particular, one of the things I want to mention is that as a husband and wife, if you're struggling, you're going through difficult times, put it to prayer, 1. 2, think also of the children. Now, I know a lot of marriages have failed for whatever reason, but what we've got to try and understand is that the impact of a marriage on the children can be very profound. You know, I look at my 3 grandchildren, and I look at them and they say, Poppy, what is this and what's that? And I talk to them, and then I say to myself, wow, how blessed am I, my wife and I, to be able to have grandchildren and also to be able to show them a biblical perspective. But then I say to myself, just imagine if something went wrong with my son's marriage, my daughter's marriage, whatever it might be. And you know what? It really is a wake-up call for all of us to ensure that we continue to support marriage from a biblical perspective. I know they struggle, and I really pray for all those that have had an unsuccessful marriage from the point of view of a divorce or whatever it might be. But let's keep to a biblical perspective. Let's make sure that we honour God in everything that we do as husband and wife.
Yeah, very well said, mate. And you've also sent us through some statistics about marriage in New Zealand. Tell us about what the trends are over there at the moment, mate.
Well, look, if we go across the ditch, as they say, you can see that the New Zealanders are really in trouble. The percentage of New Zealanders marrying is also decreasing. In particular, they're telling me that New Zealand, from a societal perspective, is in big trouble. And what they're telling me is that the New Zealand is no different to what's occurring around the world. Now, isn't that interesting that they are sort of an epitome of what the global trend is? And in particular, I was looking at some data, and they're telling me that New Zealand is finding that they are not coping as well as they should be in terms of marriages by a minister. And in this regard, and it's not a great, huge population in New Zealand, but they are failing. And the data tends to say that, there's unfortunately marriages, and they don't give me the exact data why they're failing. That's what I'd like to know. Why are they failing? But they are failing in New Zealand, and hence it's on the decrease, which is really concerning, because a strong marriage needs to be very beneficial for children, for society. So I'd love to get some more data on it, which I'll follow up. But why are they failing in New Zealand?
Yes, and around the world the statistics are the same, you said. How do you think the government policy that tends to be written in a secular fashion ends up influencing the substance of the actual society itself?
That is a great question, because in my view, and it always has been, is it's too easy to get a divorce these days. If you don't like what your wife's doing, you don't like what your husband's doing, see you later. That's it. You live apart for a certain amount of time, and the government has made it too easy to divorce one another, both mentally, physically, and it should be a partnership, a lifelong partnership. The government has made it very easy for people to opt out of something that should be a commitment under a biblical, worldview. So really, government, I'm afraid, have not done us justice in terms of supporting marriage from that perspective.
And in response to that, from the church's point of view, how do you see the advocacy in churches at the present in around the area of supporting struggling families?
Yeah, well, one of the things I'm doing is I've decided, after having done this research, that I'm going to be preaching more on the significance of marriage, more on why young children should be looking at marriage, and more as to the benefits of marriage to the church, to the individual, and to our biblical faith.
And so that biblical faith, it's bringing back our society to that biblical faith. And that seems to be the question on everybody's lips about how do we go about that? How do we reach the people who aren't yet in church and show them there's a better way? What would your advice be for us as Christian believers? We've only got a couple of minutes to go. What would your thoughts be to us?
So easy. So easy. I've always said this, and I'll continue to say it. Matthew 28:19, my friend. Go make disciples of all nations.
Come on.
And that's going to be the answer. And the other thing is 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. And if we can live by those two, we're going to do really well to get people back into church, back into a biblical worldview, and back into biblical marriages, my friend.
Absolutely. And when it comes to disciple making, we've got a theme this year here at Vision Christian Radio about discipleship. What's a couple of thoughts that you could share with us today about a way to strengthen that skill within ourselves, develop that within ourselves?
Yeah, very good question. Because don't forget, Matthew 28:19, Jesus, this is what he said, left with his disciples before he ascended into heaven. The deal here is, it's not an option. It's not something that we can think about. It's a command from Jesus to go and make disciples. And I keep saying to people, how many disciples have you made this week, this month, this year? Go out and do what the Bible tells you. Matthew 28:19, what is it? It's the Great Commission, my friend.
The Great Commission, to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. And it seems to be in Australia right now, we've got a lot of different nations that have come here to be discipled. How do we approach those, do you think, and reach across?
I think you do it by engagement, by enacting the first two commandments, love your God and love your neighbour.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time here this morning, Greg Bondar from Every Home for Christ. It's great to have you with us today, mate.
God bless you.
God bless you too. And for those of you who want to follow up and contact Greg, get a hold of his resources, you can go to christianvoiceaustralia.com.au. I'm Tosh Sturgess, filling in for Neil Johnson this week on 2020.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.